would like to welcome on stage Henry from Penumbra, Zaki from Sommelier, and 0xbrainjar from Composable Finance. Welcome and thank you for coming. This is a pleasure on my side to actually be here with you. Can we maybe start with a bit of the introductions and the project that you are involved with? I know that some of you have been like already many times on the stage, looking at you, Zaki.
Yeah, so I'm Zaki. I have many projects that I'm involved in, but Sommelier is a DeFi project, DeFi strategy manager that is running on top of a Cosmos SDK chain, but oriented towards like EVM DeFi, which I think is somewhat unique. We're not doing as much like IBC DeFi.
I'm Brainjar, founder and CEO of Composable Finance. We're focused on essentially bringing IBC to as many ecosystems as possible and then serving as an orchestration layer to build cross-chain applications on top of this infrastructure.
I'm Henry. I'm working on Penumbra, and we're building shielded DEX that lets people do private trading and market making.
Thank you very much. I mean, my first question is like, building on Cosmos, like why did you actually come to the conclusion that you would like to build stuff on Cosmos? Some people, go to EVM-focused chains, some people go on Solana. Why was the decision for you to actually start building on Cosmos?
I mean, I guess our decision is actually the opposite. We have been, it's sort of an interesting question. It's when we started this project, Sommelier, IBC DeFi didn't exist, and you could certainly build using where the IBC stack is kind of now with interchain accounts. You could actually build Sommelier around the IBC stack, and we probably will add IBC DeFi components into the system, but we started out focusing on Ethereum DeFi because it was a more mature ecosystem. But I think that there's like a lot of things that are very exciting about what's happening with Evmos, et cetera. And as IBC DeFi like comes into its own, you can imagine a product like Sommelier also existing in the IBC DeFi ecosystem.
Yeah, and so we're actually a Polkadot parachain, but we have CosmWasm on our chain. We also have, obviously, we're also extending IBC to multiple ecosystems. So I think for us, like we're adopting the Cosmos primitives to do with orchestration, logic, and interoperability. And for us, our actual chain is a substrate-based chain. And I think the reason for that is because these primitives just function so well within the Cosmos ecosystem that extending them out across to new ecosystems that are could be compatible with IBC, I think makes a lot of sense for instance, Atom being able to move to different ecosystems and Dot being able to move to the Cosmos ecosystem, et cetera. And so we're hoping to provide like the railways and the pathways to do so, but also the application layer to allow people to build cross-chain DEX aggregators, cross-chain lending aggregators, all from sort of one central location written in CosmWasm contracts.
For me, I guess there's sort of like two classes of reasons. The first one, which is probably a less kind of interesting reason, is a social one. And at the time that Penumbra was starting, that you can think of a whole bunch of people that I knew who worked on Cosmos, and so that makes it a lot easier because I can just like text Zaki and be extremely annoying and be like, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? Right? That one I think is like not as interesting to the wider question.
You can all text me too.
There's a really interesting kind of technical aspect of it, which is that building in Cosmos lets us first of all reuse a whole bunch of off-the-shelf components, right? So we have our thing that we're trying to build. We do need to have some kind of deep integration between our product and having consensus in order to be able to do things like advanced threshold cryptography, et cetera. But like, we don't want to write a consensus engine, right? We just want to take Tendermint off the shelf and just use it. We don't want to write a cross-chain mechanism. We just want to take IBC off the shelf and use it. And being part of the wider Cosmos ecosystem is really cool because even though we're building our own L1, a lot of the work that would traditionally come with that, we just don't have to do because we don't have to build our own ecosystem. We get to be part of an ecosystem. We don't need to have a fantastic implementation of every possible thing. We can just say look, if you want to do programmability, you should make an IBC transfer to Juno and use CosmWasm there. We can very sort of tightly scope and narrow in, here's our differentiated thing that's our purpose that we're trying to do. And for everything else, there's this whole ecosystem of other projects that we're interoperable with.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And maybe reflecting, how is Cosmos DeFi different from the other ecosystem for you?
So I think one of the things that is exciting about Cosmos DeFi is the sense that there are a set of things that are that as this shared infrastructure gets more mature, it sort of creates an ever more powerful ecosystem around of sort of shared capabilities. So for instance, if you want to, when we bring the Sommelier product to Cosmos, we needed interchain accounts to do it. But we didn't have to build interchain accounts. The IBC team built interchain accounts. And we don't have to be the first people to put interchain accounts into production. Most likely, folks like Quicksilver will be the first people to put interchain accounts into production. So this kind of shared infrastructure and where you're able to build unique differentiated products, but on top of shared infrastructure and a shared go-to-market and a shared putting the thing into production is, I think, pretty unique to the Cosmos ecosystem.
I think there's sort of two layers to this. The first layer is this is an ecosystem that already has IBC live, so people are already experiencing moving their assets across multiple different chains, using multiple applications on multiple different chains, and just seamlessly being able to do all these things using Kepler and just also being able to move from Discord to Discord as well. So I think there's just also a cultural component, which is the community is just quite used to just using applications on multiple different chains. And I think what this then introduces is kind of this modularizing of functionality. So essentially having the Cosmos ecosystem be, have a place for lending, a place for trading, and sort of being able to build applications that then sit on top and can abstract away the complexity for future users who may be new to the Cosmos ecosystem or might just not even want to know that they are using the Cosmos ecosystem under the hub. And so I think in the future, Cosmos DeFi sort of will become the bedrock for new types of applications that hopefully will bring in more retail, more institutional players as well, as kind of we expand this vision of cross-chain to just abstraction as well.
I think what's really interesting is the ability to make different choices, right? So if you look at the way that the whole ecosystem is set up, right, everything gets fragmented into all these different chains, and then there's this technology that allows you to bind those things back together. And the result is that different protocols, different applications are free to make their own choices for whatever makes sense for their use case. And I think that allows a significantly wider range of technical experimentation. If you compare it to, say, Ethereum, there's this expectation that even if you go to some L2 or something, oh well, we'll still be able to settle everything back to some state transition in the EVM, and that carries with it a whole range of kind of technical assumptions or requirements that evidently have been very successful for a large range of use cases, but I don't think are sort of the be-all and end-all of all applications ever, right? And having the ability to make different choices to say oh, well, we have a completely different state model, we have whatever, is a very powerful tool.
So flexibility, modularity, and compounding of the modularity, basically. Thank you. That's very exciting. So, what are you like personally like excited about? What's coming up in the DeFi ecosystem on Cosmos?
I think that we have made an enormous amount of progress on. We have made an enormous amount of progress on DEXs, like decentralized exchange, and decentralized exchange is like the core primitive that enables everything else in an ecosystem. But lending is like a very interesting problem, and especially like less well understood in this sort of asynchronous environment that is IBC. And so lending protocols have taken more time to sort of come into the IBC ecosystem than the DEX sort of use case, which is sort of an obvious extension of like existing IBC primitives. And so I'm very excited to see like lending primitives start to take off and sort of in Cosmos. There's a lot of teams who have been here who've come up to me and be like, Zaki, I have a lending protocol, and I'm like, sure, I have lots of thoughts about these things. I'd love to help. So I think it's very exciting to see. You have projects like Umi and various others that are like in production, but I don't think anyone has really cracked the lending user experience yet. On top of the IBC ecosystem, also very relevant to like Inter, because in many ways, stablecoin protocol is like a lending protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just going to be most interesting to see when just new assets. I think we're already starting to see some examples of this with some EVM assets moving into the Cosmos ecosystem, but I think in the future, just thinking about how also assets originating from the Cosmos ecosystem will behave and how people will use them in other ecosystems, I think will really teach a lot of the DeFi builders within Cosmos about sort of what makes people the most excited about these specific assets or how people are using these assets, which can then sort of influence the next generation of builders.
One thing in particular that I'm super excited about is whether or not like Agoric is going to make object capabilities like real and like a thing that exists and is practical instead of just like, oh, like this is this like idealized thing that would be so much better for security, but has never, quite, ever sort of.
I mean,
worked
every
out.
single person who uses IBC is using an object capability system that's
Right.
in the SDK, and none of these people know about it. So it seems to be working.
Anyway, so I'm super excited about that. Like the prospect of a lot of the time you can have an idea that's like very good technically, and then actually doing the execution work to turn that into something that is like real and widely used is this like incredible amount of work. And I'm super excited about the possibility of Agoric doing that for sort of the idea of having object capability systems.
I have one more thing I'm excited about that I didn't mention, which is IBC queries. So IBC queries are like a new capability that sort of we didn't really realize how important they were going to be, but they've really surfaced in the last few months as like a very important primitive in like the Cosmos DeFi ecosystem. And it's basically the idea of being able to read state from any other Cosmos chain into another Cosmos chain using the same sort of core technology that we used for reading IBC packets from one chain into another chain. And so you can imagine using that to build Osmosis can become the price oracle for the entire network of Cosmos DeFi in a trustless ecosystem based on IBC queries. We can use, with the whole, like a big subtext of the whole like Prop 69 debate was, do you want to have programmability built into the Cosmos Hub state machine so you have immediate access to the state, or do you want to access that state via interchain queries? It's pretty clear that the Cosmos community wants us to push forward on that technology, and I think that enables a whole new set of DeFi primitives.
Very interesting. And like maybe like pushing on this, like like at the moment we are already like living in the multi-chain world. Like we see the fragmentation of the either protocols, also the liquidity across different chains. Like what's your view? Like what's going to be the role of the Cosmos ecosystem within this like broader ecosystem?
So I think the Cosmos ecosystem, the Cosmos DeFi ecosystem will finally have product market fit when it is kind of exploiting the ability to operate outside of these constraints of like settling back to the EVM or operating within one giant shared state machine, and actually produce products that are unique and differentiated and like can't exist in these other ecosystems. And I think Penumbra is a really good example of that. Agoric is another really good example of that, of things that would be prohibitively difficult to build or impossible to build in other ecosystems and can be built on top of Cosmos.
Yeah, echoing that, I think we really don't really understand what a cross-chain application actually like looks like, as far as being able to have something kind of sit on top of multiple different protocols and have them all communicate with each other for like one specific function. I think the future of Cosmos is one in which you perform a swap on osmosis and you're able to essentially tap into liquidity potentially outside of just osmosis as well. And I think once we start to see more of these kind of generalized applications and more of these applications that are unique use cases of cross-chain, which obviously everyone talks about cross-chain, but when you see like the list of here are the applications that you could build with technologies like IBC, the list is like 6 or 7 things, right? And so I'm curious to see what people can come up with kind of beyond this initial set and how unique they can really be. And I think that's really where the Cosmos ecosystem can shine.
So a bunch of stuff that I was going to say is kind of already covered, but maybe one thing that I think is worth paying attention to as sort of this like potential like dark horse thing is the idea of solo machines. I think is very cool and is something that is also very unique to the Cosmos ecosystem. Like, you know, there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually have to be on a blockchain, but it would be useful for it to be able to communicate with them. And the fact that, you know, when you're doing IBC, you don't necessarily have to be doing, although we think of IBC as a cross-chain mechanism, you could just be doing IBC to some database, right? And there's a lot of really interesting, like I think that there's this really interesting sort of spectrum of decentralization that IBC just kind of is totally agnostic to, and it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Like I think we're going to end up having these sort of like big, you know, very decentralized public networks, and then there'll be like smaller sort of like niche decentralized networks, and then maybe there will be some, you know, semi-centralized entities that you can still just interact with, and it just is sort of all part of this one kind of cohesive internet of state machines.
And can you maybe like share with us, like Henry, like what's your vision in terms of like the privacy and the role of the privacy within the DeFi? Like let's start with you because you are always the latest. So
sure. Yeah, I think like the ability for people to control what information they disclose while they're doing things is, I think, a really fundamental blocker for a lot of the real-world kinds of coordination that people might want to do. Like the idea that, for instance, somebody is going to do trading and anybody can just like open up a block explorer and see a complete list of everybody else's trades is kind of nuts. And you have in the ETH ecosystem, right? There's like all of these like analytics firms that are like, how do we like data mine all of these like retail traders so we can figure out exactly what they're going to do and then like, you know, extract more value from them. I think that's an example where people, I think in blockchains have historically talked about privacy as being this sort of issue of principle or of human rights or, you know, this kind of this abstract concept, and that's all true. I'm 100% on board with that, right? But it's much more than that. It's just this like very basic kind of practical thing, and we're in a kind of unfortunate situation because actually building that technology is very hard. And so there's kind of this race of like, how fast can we improve the tooling to build private systems relative to the speed that we're trying to advance the entire rest of the ecosystem. And if you look at the development of privacy tooling for building private systems and like ZK infrastructure over, say, the last 4 or 5 years, it's incredible. It's like this night and day thing, and I think that trend is only going to accelerate.
Maybe BrainJar, like, would you think that the lack of privacy could become an inhibiting factor in terms of the adoption?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're seeing exactly what happens in TradFi now is like your data and what you're actually doing in the public markets is much more valuable than probably the trades that you're putting down yourself, right? And like large hedge funds operate by purchasing huge amounts of data from various data providers and from people who you may not necessarily think are selling your data, but they are. And I think this very same concept is starting to happen, and I think will definitely progress even more into the future as like literally everything becomes, retrievable and people can very easily see what you're doing on chain. And I think in the future, if we want this paradigm of being able to do things with money without people being able to see what you're doing, we're also going to have to solve cross-chain bridging in a private manner as well. And these are some things that we look into, but it's obviously a very difficult problem, but I think a problem that if it takes multiple years is worth solving, because otherwise we're essentially just copy-pasting the same problem from TradFi back into DeFi.
So the one of the things I think a lot about the privacy component is the protocols are very complex, but privacy actually like sort of ripples out into the entire user experience. You'll need block explorers that you can input a viewing key into to like decrypt a transaction. You'll need a completely different sort of wallet infrastructure than what we currently do with Kepler in order to both like interact with your funds, preserve privacy, etc. There is an enormous amount. There is like a sort of an exponential amount of ecosystem work that comes with actually building privacy-preserving versions of all of like the DeFi ecosystem that we're building. And so I think that there's like a huge the privacy is both incredibly important to grow the space. On the other hand, we should not underestimate like the complexity that comes with privacy. And it is generally not like, oh, it's like you do things exactly the same as we are doing it right now, and you just like change one thing.
I think Henry had that reaction.
Yeah, just a quick plug there, which is that like all of the examples that Zaki gave are things that we're going to be building. So if you would like to build those as part of the ecosystem, do get in touch.
Yeah. No, I like there are a lot of privacy projects inside of Cosmos, not just Penumbra, Anoma, which has been like sort of less in this conference, but that's another extremely exciting team in the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think one of the things that essentially that Penumbra is having to do but Anoma and Penumbra are doing is they're building like an entire Rust development ecosystem and like privacy development ecosystem that is sort of parallel to the Cosmos SDK development ecosystem. And that ecosystem will be then is again a bunch of shared public goods that other teams will use to build other privacy preserving things. And so if you wanted to start, building the block explorer for privacy preserving Cosmos chains, now would be a really good time.
Very cool. Maybe last question from my side, and that's I left it at as the last question because if we would start with it, I think we would spend the whole panel. But it's the Terra situation. Is there any ramifications that are maybe not seen? And also what's your view on the path forward? The team has put forward a plan yesterday, or is there a way out?
So this situation is the biggest stress test. It's the kind of stress test that we imagined when we were starting to develop IBC, interoperability. We were like, stuff like this will happen, a chain will collapse, it will fork, all of this stuff. And we have all of these mechanisms for potentially interacting and dealing with these things. There's a lot of tools in the toolkit for how these things will work. We don't know how it's going to play out. It's like, but we just like largely the entire system was able to manage this catastrophe without having a single like centralized actor involved at all in like coordinating response, figuring out mitigations. Osmosis did a bunch of governance actions. Terra did a bunch of governance actions, all designed to mitigate this catastrophe. And like all of that happened, and so I'm pleased with this.
I think it really sort of like has put kind of like almost immediately just other teams started saying, hey, CosmWasm builders come deploy on our chain. So I think now it's really shined a massive spotlight on CosmWasm. I do also take a pretty bearish take on the entire situation because obviously like this was one in which like neobanks were getting set up, retail was getting brought into the ecosystem, and then sort of everything just blew up. So I think it's going to take some time for us to be able to attract the same types of people who were just kind of like throwing money into Anchor and sort of other protocols within the ecosystem. But I do also think that the general ethos of Terra, which is kind of like building applications for retail use, focused on like sustainable yield, which obviously we're not going to get into that. But basically, I think these things will recover and just will shift to other ecosystems. And I think a huge positive result of this is because these applications are built with CosmWasm, they can now sort of easily integrate into chains such as our chain that now have CosmWasm on them.
I guess this is like the kind of thing that's like a lot easier to say in retrospect, but I think one lesson is that maybe different Cosmos projects and different zones should just like have like a little more kind of distrust of other zones. Like the whole architecture of IBC is technically set up so that you have this kind of fault limiting. Zones don't necessarily have to sort of completely trust each other, et cetera. But if you look at what happened with the Terra implosion, although there was like relatively contained sort of damage from that stress test, or catastrophe really, it did not was not perfectly contained. And I think that going forward, I think it makes sense for zones, different chains to be a little more opinionated about sort of protecting their users from various kinds of counterparty risk.
Very interesting. Maybe let me take one from the audience. Somebody's asking, like, when the ETH moves to the proof of stakes, what kind of impact will it have on Cosmos, if any?
The only thing that's actually is it like gets us incrementally closer to the day where you could imagine where you could do IBC, like with no compromises to Ethereum. Like the proof of work thing is a huge challenge with trying to do IBC to Ethereum. It would also, but like a roll up on top of Ethereum that could do IBC natively gets a lot closer in a proof of stake Ethereum world.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else?
I would just echo that. I mean, this is something we're actually already looking into. Yeah, so I think definitely excited to be able to sort of like trustlessly bridge between ETH and the IBC ecosystem.
Then thank you very much for the participation and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks.